Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. If you're new to my live streams, we have these regularly. And in the final part of every live stream, I usually also open the space up for the community for any participation or questions as well. And we always try and take as much as possible. Tonight, I have very interesting things to talk to you about. Number one, there was an attack of an individual from the Druze community, the community who Netanyahu has been trying to kind of put on his side and say, you know, these are our brothers, we're going to go and save them in Syria. There was a guy who made an attack, he's a 20-year-old guy, he was living in Germany, came back, and he did it in a Haifa station. And he killed a few people. He was targeting Israeli soldiers, and he was eventually assassinated. And the meanings behind that attack. Then we're going to go to the statements of Benjamin Netanyahu in his psycho speech in the Israeli Knesset, including Israel beating up the bereaved families and families of prisoners of war inside the Israeli Knesset, alongside other statements from the leaders of Hamas about the ceasefire in Gaza and what's being prepared for a case where Israel continues down the path of war against Gaza. And I'm going to start off with the first bit about this Druze Arab-Israeli guy who had this attack in Haifa, one of the main cities in the northern part of Israel, or occupied Palestine. This guy came from Germany and he had this. This is not the first foreigner attack inside of Israel, by the way. In the past 2 years, there were multiple attacks. Some of them were from Turks. One of them was from a Moroccan. And this time was from an actual guy who was born and raised in a town called Shfa'amir, actually, inside of modern day, what is called now Israel. And he was in Germany and he came back. It came in a very sensitive climate. Benjamin Netanyahu has been talking a lot about the Druze community in Syria, that he wants to protect them. And, you know, we're going to attack, and they have plans to have a state, channeling money, having some of their senior figures going to meet with some in the community trying to have something. This came as an explosion. You know, all of a sudden this guy would come, and you're talking about a community within Israel who serve in the Israeli army, by the way. Why would he do that? Well, he would do that to show that what Benjamin Netanyahu is talking about is absolute garbage. And he's representing a growing sentiment in the Druze community, also inside of Israel, against what Israel is doing, what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing. Now, the important part of all of this is again to highlight the fact of how much the statements of Benjamin Netanyahu are statements for PR, like his victory statements, like his actions in Syria and in Lebanon, all of his delays in Gaza that lead to a U-turn, which lead us to Gaza. I mean, this is one of the main things that I wanted to talk to you about tonight. Benjamin Netanyahu had a speech recently. Benjamin Netanyahu, when he has speeches, he really resembles Hitler. And he had this speech in the Israeli Knesset, during which some of the bereaved families of the Israeli prisoners of war, they were allowed to attend. Initially, the Israeli security inside of the Israeli Knesset said that we're not going to allow all of you. Clearly, they've had some shortlisting, you know, some figures they don't want them in. Then all of them had a silent protest. They said, if you're going to prevent some of us from going in, we are the families of those who were hurt most because of what's happening now. None of us will go in. Up until it reached a stage where the security said, okay, no problem, you can go in. However, it only came after many problems occurred. So I wanted to share this video with you here, and then I will give you further comments about it. This came from Israel today, from the Israeli Knesset. Of course, it's in Hebrew. We'll speak about the bits after I share the video with you. It's going to begin with what the Israeli security forces, the Netanyahu forces, did to these bereaved families and families of the Israeli prisoners of war, followed by snippets of what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say in his speech. Here you go.
התמונות המחרידות הללו נראו היום במסדרונות הכנסת.
בזכות הילדים שלכם, הם יכולים לשבת, לקבל משכורת, ולחיות. הילדים שלנו עמוק באדמה. הילדים שלנו נהרגו ונרצחו, שהם יקבלו משכורת.
בכנסת הוחלט בתחילה שלא לאפשר לכל בני המשפחות השכולות להגיע ליציע הציבור לצפות בדיון המליאה על הקמת ועדת חקירה ממלכתית.
מה עם ועדת חקירה ממלכתית?
ההורים הודיעו שאם לא כולם נכנסים, אף אחד לא נכנס. עד שלבסוף הלחץ השתלם ובני המשפחות התייצבו ביציע.
קצין הכנסת ומנכ"ל הכנסת בעצמם נמצאים שם למעלה, מאפשרים להגדיל את המכסה ולהכניס.
כדי לשמוע את האמירה הזאת מראש הממשלה.
אנחנו דורשים להקים ועדת חקירה אובייקטיבית, מאוזנת, בלתי תלויה, לא מוטט פוליטית, ולא מגוון אחד, ולא רק מקשת דעות מצומצמת של 0.25 מילימטר, שכולם מרוכזים בקצה אחד של הקשת הפוליטית. איך אפשר לעשות דבר כזה? ולקרוא לזה מאוזן ואובייקטיבי? מה אתם חושבים, שאנחנו ילדים? שאנחנו לא מבינים את זה? תגידו את המילה ממלכתי וזה עושה את זה ממלכתי. ממלכתיות אמיתית.
ולאחריה נקטו מחאה שקטה בהפניית הגב.
לא צריך לחלות בכך, על הסבל שהוא עבר. הוא הרגיש את המחויבות.
מדובר בדיון שנכפה על נתניהו בחתימת 40 חברי כנסת, ובאופוזיציה ניצלו את נוכחותו.
חבר הכנסת קריב, קריאה ראשונה.
תאמין לי חבר הכנסת קריב, אני יודע מה זה משפחות שכולות, ואתה לא צריך ללמד אותי את זה.
אבל לראש הממשלה היו מסרים אחרים להעביר, קודם כל באשר לחטופים.
ואני אומר לחמאס, אם לא תשחררו את חטופינו, יהיו לכך השלכות שאתם לא יכולים לדמיין. לא הכל גלוי לעין, וטוב שכך. כבר למדת.
Okay, audio, yeah, audio, corrected the audio. I hope you can hear me back again. A couple of things to do with this video because there were no subtitles. Number one, the actual people who are being hit, these are bereaved families of those who were killed in Israel, and the Israeli forces were not allowing them to go in. Then they had this mini protest, then they allowed them to go in. Okay. After they went in, some of them started to scream and shout certain things about Benjamin Netanyahu, having pictures of people. And the whole discussion here, it was imposed on Benjamin Netanyahu. It was imposed on Benjamin Netanyahu because 40 people had signed that, well, he has to do it. These were the first scenes of them beating some of the people up in the beginning. So he had to have this speech in the Israeli Knesset. And of course, people took advantage of it to start asking certain questions with Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, the main thing that was raised in this discussion in the Israeli Knesset was having a state investigation. Netanyahu doesn't want a state investigation. And in this phase here, where he went mad, he was explaining how he doesn't want how he doesn't want a state investigation. He wants an objective investigation, but without explaining how, it's going to be objective. Oh no, not one political party, not one this party. But when you have a state investigation, it's independent, But what he wants to run away from is having something independent against him. What does he want? Objective investigation. Well, the Israeli army, they already had an inquiry, but people are asking for something more thorough and independent that would be conclusive about everyone who is responsible, not just the military establishment failure, because there were certain things that were not addressed in the inquiry of the Israeli army, which were, primarily notifying the Israeli prime minister over 4 hours before October the 7th attack started to happen, after certain notifications and after certain alerts were raised by people who were in the area surrounding Gaza, and primarily, observers in the Israeli army. And Benjamin Netanyahu, he denies that. He denies that despite the fact that, many people confirmed it already. They said, we notified Benjamin Netanyahu, we told him, and he chose to not do anything about it. And he said later on that I only knew after the attacks began, several hours, I had no prior knowledge. Why are people asking for a state investigation? Because it would release even more information that would be a damning indictment against Benjamin Netanyahu. Because Benjamin Netanyahu, 2 weeks into the 7th of October, he started to hand out gas exploration contracts to multinational companies to start exploring gas off the shores of Gaza. Now, you would think you're in the middle of this existential war, as he called it, against your state. The last thing you would think about is gas exploration contracts. What do you mean gas exploration contracts? And there were many question marks, like shorting stocks with some of the most well-known banks inside of Israel, gaining them hundreds of millions in profit. Many things people are still suspicious of. And of course, following Benjamin Netanyahu's orders after the genocide began, everyone started to see that this man is not really concerned about the lives of the Israeli people. Which leads us to the second point that I wanted to talk to you about. Hamas, they're hearing what Israel has to say. Benjamin Netanyahu is saying, listen, we haven't agreed on phase 2. Steve Witkoff, with all his generosity, came and he decided to come up with this nice proposal. Continue down the ceasefire in phase 1, as in continue with not having an all-out war, right? Extend phase 1. But by the way, all of the conditions of phase 1 are supposed to continue to phase 2, according to the agreement. But seeing as they haven't agreed on phase 2 yet, Witkoff said, let's continue down a ceasefire extension. And it would include the month of Ramadan, followed by Eid. In exchange, Hamas will be releasing more Israeli prisoners of war, alive and dead. And Israel will also release some Palestinian prisoners. Hamas said, no, thank you. Why no, thank you? Well, because number one, Israel already had so many breaches, and they outlined the breaches that Israel had on the aid level, on the breaches of attacks against people, many martyrs and delays that they had. But most importantly, the added conditions of Israel to now specifically say Hamas needs to disarm. Hamas explicitly has to disarm. This was something that was not included in the ceasefire agreement. If the ceasefire agreement included anything as such, it wouldn't have been signed and agreed upon by Hamas. What Hamas did agree upon is some sort of formula that would allow elements, Palestinian national elements who are interested with the interests of the Palestinian people, who are genuine, who are transparent, who have integrity. And Hamas, on the other hand, they will remain there as, armed resistance movement, because there's no negotiation about that. But Israel says, no, you need to disarm. Yeah, this is what we want, to go to phase 2. Otherwise, we will and we will. Now, so far, Israel started to have more breaches, like, UAV was seen in Gaza, according to the agreement. No, the fighter jets of Israel should not fly over Gaza, or drones or whatever. And there were a couple of attacks where reports said 3 Palestinians were martyred and more were wounded as well. Another escalation is cutting off the aid. Well, they already had so many breaches, but now they're actually cutting the basic aid, food and what have you. And of course, despite everything going in the past 42 days or 45 days, that's not enough to compensate for, people dying from famine, and people are dying from the cold. Babies are dying from the cold in Gaza. Israel only allowed about 15 caravans, and they agreed to get in 60,000. Not enough tents, not enough solar levels, that they agreed to get into Gaza. So many breaches, heavy equipment to take the rubble off and remove the bodies, including the bodies of the Israelis who are still in Gaza. But Hamas are telling them now, we will not continue with an extension on phase 1, and the Israeli occupation will not be receiving any prisoners of war unless it's through a deal. Netanyahu is delusional. Mahmoud al-Mirdawi said, who is a senior figure in Hamas, if he thinks that by starving the people through his war of starvation, he can achieve what he failed to achieve in the battlefield, they will only get their prisoners of war through a deal. If we have a continuation of this deal as we agreed upon, both of us, fine. We are actually very keen on that. But if you don't want that, then we're not going to go ahead with it. That's what Hamas are telling them. And today there was another statement from another Hamas figures called Osama Hamdan, outlining all of the breaches that came from Israel. Now, how is that being taken internally in Israel? The tone is rising from the people on the ground. More and more protests are taking place, and more harsh statements are coming from people who, one of them was the previous Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert. He was insinuating that Benjamin Netanyahu, we shouldn't call for his resignation, we must sack him. Insinuating more aggression in what the Israeli public must do to get Netanyahu down. It's escalating even further. More calls that will hint that there might be a prospect of some violence. Now, so far, the opposition, despite their fierce opposition of Benjamin Netanyahu, they refrained from that. Although there were suspicious moves and actions taking place inside of Israel during this whole genocide that linked some Israelis to acts of aggression inside of Israel. For example, the attack on Benjamin Netanyahu's house. The Israeli security establishment, they did not release any more evidence about that. Fire bombs launched at Benjamin Netanyahu's house. Then the networks that were operating for Iran, including conducting acts of sabotage within Israel knowingly for Iran, again signaling that many people in Israel, and we're talking about from all aspects of society, younger, older, men, women, different backgrounds, secular, religious, non-religious, but all of them had one thing in common. They were operating for Iran against Israel, signaling that they have more trust in Iran the country that Israel says, it's our arch enemy, than Benjamin Netanyahu. They have more faith in Iran than Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, is Benjamin Netanyahu, that's the key question remains here, because we don't have answers to all of the questions, but we'll of course going to ask them. Will Benjamin Netanyahu continue with his stubbornness now, or will he back down? We want to look at the pattern. The pattern of Benjamin Netanyahu shows that he did U-turns. He refused to go into a ceasefire agreement before eliminating Hamas and completely disarming them, kicking them off from Gaza. He said they won't have a deal unless Hamas either raises the white flag, hand themselves in, or be expelled from Gaza and completely eliminate them. This is what he used to say. He also said they won't withdraw from Netzarim. He also said they won't withdraw from the majority parts of Gaza. And he also had certain delays, and he also tried to cancel the beginning of the ceasefire agreement. And with all of these cases, with all of these things, Benjamin Netanyahu made U-turns. U-turns that were not in the favor of Israel, because they made the negotiations and they made the conditions between them and the Palestinian side more difficult. For example, with the release of the Palestinian prisoners and the release of the Israeli prisoners of war, or the Palestinian hostages, the real hostages, the children being kidnapped. Now, the vast majority of women and children have been freed, but there are reports that some women are remaining in prison inside of Israel. So, judging on the pattern of Benjamin Netanyahu, especially in the past few weeks, there are strong indications that he might have a U-turn. However, that U-turn might not be so straightforward because of various reasons. Number one, he wants to please the bloodlust of the bloodthirsty Bezalel Smotrich. So now he's killing a few Palestinians inside of Gaza. He's having these breaches, not of course to an all-out level, because Smotrich was telling him after phase one ends, we need to go to a full-scale war, even fiercer than before, and eliminate them, and then continue. But Benjamin Netanyahu, he doesn't look like he wants to do that now. Therefore, he's trying to feed this bloodlust by these certain breaches to tell Smotrich, look, I didn't go into phase two. I am breaching. I am killing some people. I have stopped aid to go into Gaza. But I might have to come up with some sort of an agreement so that we can later on go back to the war. So will you remain with me? Because he knows it's not going to work. He doesn't want anyone. He doesn't want anyone from the opposition with him. Because you saw how things looked like in the Israeli Knesset. So it will not be as straightforward as it should really be. He will have certain breaches in Gaza, and it wouldn't be surprising that he might actually have more escalation even in Syria, because part of the reason that Benjamin Netanyahu is escalating in Syria as well is to cover up what's happening in Gaza too, and that can also be used as an excuse for the people who he wants to keep with him in the Israeli government to proceed with a phase two in the ceasefire agreement, to say that there are more pressing things. Israel is calling it the seven front war. And we need to have this temporary continuation of the ceasefire. Only for later on, we'll go back to everything and, we'll eliminate Hamas and we'll do all of that. So there might be certain moves. However, judging by the recent pattern, Netanyahu might have another U-turn at some point, especially with an administration in the United States that, despite all of their comments, it's not looking like they're very keen on escalating things further. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you, and I'll open the space for the community to take in some questions if you have any of them, if you wouldn't mind highlighting them for me. And welcome again, everyone, to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in. Let's see who we have with us. The virus, thank you for your contribution. Okay, let's go see if we have anything beginning. And again, if you wouldn't mind highlighting anything, if anyone is participating now. Tom, hypothetically speaking, what if we've all been duped and Hamas has been co-opted by the IOF and the CIA like all Israel's other neighbor governments? Stranger things have happened. Well, I think that requires an actual reading of their history. How they were founded, when they were founded, under what conditions, who founded them, where did they come from, which parts of occupied Palestine were they expelled from, or their ancestors and families, the fathers and mothers were expelled from. We need to understand all of that and understand how Israel was behaving and treating and dealing with these movements at the time. Now, on the ground, if we want to talk about the Palestinian resistance, well, it existed since the establishment of Israel. It's beyond any movement, really, because it's a classic case of an occupied nation that is being oppressed and an occupier, an aggressor. And this situation happened in so many parts of the world with so many nations from so many different backgrounds with so many different movements. Now, of course, their enemies would try and infiltrate them and also spread some propaganda, and some rumors that, it's all a setup so that you can, people can lose faith in everyone or everything that is resisting this entity. But if we want to talk about Hamas, you're talking about an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood who decided to take their own path and independence after they actually decided to take up arms against Israel following the first uprising or the first intifada in 1987. But before them, there were other resistance movements who were armed resistance against Israel. And they started to gain more popularity, especially after the PLO decided to go into the peace process with Israel, not only in the beginning, but after it showed it's absolutely doing nothing but more harm to the Palestinian case. Now, from the beginning, from the early days, Israel was hunting them down. Israel was imprisoning every member of Hamas. Not after a year or two, in the early days. In the beginning phases. Now, you would think if they were set up by this country, they would give them a bit of a freedom of movement. No, they were imprisoning them from the beginning. They were killing them from the beginning. And that has been the case for ever since their inception, the inception of Hamas as a movement. And moving up till now, well, you have a country, you have a war criminal entity of terror committing war crimes with impunity, backed by Western powers. And who's standing up against them exactly? People are standing up against them. Well, in Palestine, Hamas are leading the resistance against them, but there are over 13 resistance movements if you want to talk about Gaza. And in the Arab and Muslim world, well, the Arab world primarily, there are other resistance movements who stand up against Israel. Now, who does it serve? This is the question. Who does it serve to say, oh, these people are made by them and we're only seeing theater? A theater for what? For Israel to have an excuse to go on an all-out war to attack the Palestinians? If Israel wanted an excuse, they would create this excuse. Previous acts of Israeli aggression proved that they don't need any excuse. If they, for example, when they started 2008 war, 2012, 2014, Israeli instigations, Israeli assassinations, deliberate assassination of a senior figure, for example, that would lead to a retaliation. All of that. And of course, all of these escalations are escalations as a result of the problem. What is the problem? The problem is the existence of an apartheid supremacist entity founding itself on ethnic cleansing, on mass expulsion, on terror, and on genocide, like we can see. And whether it's Hamas or no Hamas, anything as such that exists will be facing resistance. That is like nature's way, really. If you're sitting in your home and someone comes in your home and tells you, you know, get out, it's mine. Why? Because fairy tales from 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, based on my interpretation, say that this is mine. I mean, are you going to go or are you going to put up a fight? So I hope that briefly clarifies. Of course, there's a lot more to be spoken in that regard, but and I spoke about it at the beginning after the genocide began as well, because many people had this notion and that Israel, they support some resistance movement to make others weaker and what have you, which is not substantiated really. And history shows, and the pattern that happened proves that this theory is not correct whatsoever. And MCFC, thank you so much, my friend. Again, much appreciated. Christina saying, will other countries take action now that Israel is booking food and medicine supplies? Well, they've blocked medicine for the whole time, approximately. The hospitals don't have what they need. So very limited things came in. Food was going in. But that will create a problem potentially with Yemen, because Yemen are the only side that said if they actually have a siege, we can continue. No, not in these exact words. They said if Israel, they won't stop their actions up until Israel stops the genocide and lifts the siege. So they tied these two together. Now, if Israel is going to show that they're slowly bringing back the siege again on Gaza, well, that could be an excuse for Yemen. And Yemen proved that they don't really care. They don't have a lot of calculations, Yemen. They don't worry about implications. They don't worry about being attacked. They don't worry about pressure. They try to apply pressure on them through their banking system, sometimes through Saudi Arabia too. Nothing bothered them. The genocide coalition, aka the United States and Britain, they were attacking Yemen because of their embargo on Israel, but they didn't stop up until the last day. And on the last day, they said, we will keep monitoring them. So if there's anyone who's likely to do anything, it would be Yemen. However, you need to kind of give it time, because so many things can happen in 1 or 2 days. So many things. They said they were monitoring. Israel, well, we saw how many U-turns they have. Netanyahu, how many U-turns did he have so far? So many. So they're going to see. They're going to monitor, and they will take decisive action, I believe, based on what they've done before, if things continue like that. Mahib, salam, my friend, and happy Ramadan to you. With US and Western countries continuously supporting non-stop, when do you think this bloodshed and suffering of the Palestinians will end? Well, Israel is slowly losing some support even with Western establishments that traditionally supported it. Key Western establishments, primarily the United States, let's say Britain, Germany, a few more countries, they're like relentless in their support for these war criminals, because they share a lot of common values together, racism, supremacy, colonialism, mass murder. These things are shared between these establishments. We're not talking about the populations, we're talking about the establishments. The populations, you saw Western populations and what they really think. And that showed you that, well, there is no real democracy in the West. This whole democracy is a facade. It's a front. If there's democracy in Yemen, where people protest and ask their people in power, their leaders, to do something, and they do. But in Western countries, you have elected dictatorships with, of course, controlled media and propaganda and lies, and the list goes on. The bloodshed will continue. The bloodshed and suffering will continue. And the threat or the risk of more bloodshed and more suffering will continue so long as you have an entity of terror, a war criminal entity. Israel is a terrorist state supported by other terrorist states. By definition, not just by my definition, by legal definition, what they're doing are war crimes, genocide, ICJ, ICC. And what do Western countries do, or the United States primarily, with some of its allies do, when, well, someone challenges them legally based on the laws that they put in anyway? They'll go against the law. They'll have sanctions against the ICC, and they'll threaten the ICC prosecutor with a bullet to his head and threaten his family. And they will apply pressure on the ICJ. And the United States is already prepared with the Hague Invasion Act, in case something gets implemented. They already have laws that allow them to go and invade the Hague, and potentially kill the prosecutors and the judges and what have you, and the state itself and everything, to liberate the war criminals. So it will continue so long as they're there. So long as they're there, it's going to continue. And that's what people should be talking about. This is the day after that people should be talking about. This is the country that should be disarmed. This is the regime that should be taken down. This is the country that should be de-radicalized. They have the audacity to talk about all of these terms with the oppressed, with the Palestinians. But yeah, that's where the argument we need to focus on that argument. Splendid is saying something about the UN stream regarding Houthis having a ship captured. Well, I didn't hear anything about that, unless you saw something that was a little bit old. I mean, I will look now. There's nothing new. There's nothing new. It would be all over the place if it was new. But the problem is sometimes when you watch stuff, all of a sudden a video from 5 or 6 months ago will pop up and you'll think it's from today. I mean, I sometimes can make that mistake. I'll go in and watch the video. I'll go, hold on a second. And then you'll see the date and it's like 4 or 5 months ago. Not to say that that's the case with you, of course, but I haven't seen anything to kind of validate that or confirm that. Sheem T, thank you. You said people keep saying Ukraine would put NATO next to Russia when Russia wants to take control of Ukraine, and they would be next to Poland, which is NATO. Look, I believe that the situation in Ukraine is pretty straightforward. Firstly, the Ukrainian people are victims of global powers and their games. Listen, I'll be posting a video of, what's his name? Jeffrey Sachs, because he has a very interesting insight about the situation. This man was involved in the talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and he mentioned a few things. And he said that Zelensky accepted a deal with Putin. According to him, Putin wanted to have a deal. He wanted to basically make sure that Ukraine would remain neutral. Zelensky agreed in the first week. All of this could have been avoided if Ukraine would have remained neutral. And before all of that, by the way, we need to go back to why there are even tensions. Why are there even tensions in Eastern Europe with Russia? After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Americans and the Russians Hell, the Americans in Ukraine, who asked Ukraine to get rid of its nuclear arms? It was the United States in exchange for protection. So long for protection. They got rid of their nukes. But anyway, Ukraine was a part of the Soviet Union. Many of these countries fell under the influence of the Soviet Union and the Greater Russia and the Tsar period and previously, especially Ukraine. But let's talk about after the collapse of the Soviet Union. What was the agreement between and I apologize if I'm taking, I'm going back to that time, but I think it's important to contextualize rather than, like Western mainstream media would like you to think that all of a sudden someone went mad and they've gone crazy and we need to defend them just because they have their own interests in doing so. It's not the case. In 1994, the US had an agreement with Russia. It said, we're not going to expand eastwards. The NATO is supposed to be a defensive pact, a defensive organization. The United States breached that constantly, going against Russia and thinking that they need to accept that. If Russia was expanding on the US borders, would they accept that? If China was sending its warships and aircraft carriers off the coasts of California or Florida or something, would the United States be happy with that? No, but they're arrogant. The United States and many Western powers have heaps of arrogance and supremacy, and they believe that they can do everything that they want without any scrutiny whatsoever, with their moral high ground and this belief that they are better than other nations and more enlightened. And they treat Russia the same. They're breaching. Okay. Ukraine was a non-NATO member. They did not show any intent to join the NATO. The talks about NATO started to rise up after, they collapsed the previous government in 2014. The protests came up because of corruption, many things, people wanted reform. However, the previous president had good ties with Russia. Well, it's normal to have good ties with Russia because they're the closest country to you. And that doesn't mean you need to be submitting to their will or what have you, but at least be neutral. But then we had Zelensky, Western puppet. I mean, after 2014, 2019, Zelensky came in the late 10s. Russia took Crimea, and there were problems in some of the eastern parts of Ukraine as well, who were more pro-Russian than they were with the new administration. And talk about corruption. Corruption didn't go anywhere. Statistically, the Ukrainian regime remained corrupt, and the people know that very well, which led Russia to take action following what they described as prior knowledge and intent to make Ukraine join the NATO. And the reasons, according to Sachs and some others as well, the reasons were bringing Zelensky on the table, and that happened. And listen, there were confirmations that they were about to reach a deal in the beginning. And by the way, there was a very, very similar case back in July, and there was another push from the United States this time. The US and, the Biden administration and the Bojo administration in Britain at the time started to, fill up the head of Zelensky. No, go in, we'll support you and we'll do this and we'll do that. Why? Military-industrial complex, profiteering, corruption, $500 billion. $500 billion from where? From your pocket. It's not like them. It's people's money, but they want to have this money being channeled to where they want, at the expense of 1 million Ukrainians dead. The million Ukrainians who died in this war. Russia's saying 65,000 Ukrainians were killed in Kursk, Russian territory. 1 million Ukrainians, forced conscription. I mean, I don't like Trump or his administration, and I don't like Zelensky. But J.D. Vance did tell Zelensky certain things that were correct, such as the forced conscription. Question is, of course, where were you with Netanyahu and the forced conscription and, imprisoning people who refuse? Forced conscription, they drag people from the streets in Ukraine, young men, to go and kill them in this death machine. And Western countries were opening offices, go and die. For what? Thinking that you can beat Russia? Russia can take down Ukraine in one bomb. They didn't want to do that. So the West, Western establishment, we talk about the West, we're not talking about collective West, to be fair. We're talking about the United States administration and NATO, to be more specific, although there were certain disagreements within NATO states, even from Europe, and that has been evident, especially with the roller coaster, political roller coaster in Europe, apart from the financial roller coaster too. They were the ones who pushed Zelensky to go into this war for their own benefit. It wasn't for the benefit of anyone. And guess what? Now you have an administration with the United States who's telling Zelensky, do a U-turn because that's what's suitable for us now. Without any remorse. Your administration, of course, Trump's excuse is, it's the Biden and he was stupid and we're sending money, was stupid. But he wants to benefit from the property. This is what people don't understand. He has a property background. And that's why he talks about the property in Gaza. Let's rebuild and get the people out. And having these AI-generated videos, of him having a statue. As if any statue, he would have any luck with that. So I believe that if it wasn't for the hostile approach of the US-backed NATO against Russia, I think Europe would be thriving. What's the normal extension of Europe? Russia or the United States? The United States is behind the ocean. Russia is in Europe. Russia was your main supplier of energy. When you took this hostile approach with Russia, your people started to pay the price economically and financially that you did not cover for, by the way. Did any Western country help its people after the gas prices blew up? And not only that, they went and blew up the Nord Stream 2. The Americans did it. That was supposed to reduce the prices, the cost of living of every European almost. With Russia, the Americans went and blew it up. And the Germans, not a word. The German administration, like small little poodles for the American master. They did nothing. Who paid the price? The European population paid the price. So Russia is a natural extension. And there are many, many questions, by the way. Like the hostile approach the EU takes towards Turkey, for example. Think about it. Why didn't they have Turkey in the EU for so long? Many senior officials in the EU blatantly said that it has to do with their Muslim population. Blatantly. Disregarding any benefits, by the way. And the future is based on cooperation, by the way. You can't have this, I'm on my own, I'm self-sufficient, and I don't need anyone. No. All countries should work together in a collaborative manner. But the problem is, the United States, primarily, the administration or the deep state, call them whatever you like, the group of interests, the globalists, the corporations, whatever you want to call them, they are still having this mindset of post-World War II, the New World Order, and we can do whatever we want. That's not how it works. And that's why other countries are increasing in strength. That's why you have the BRICS. That's why you have other countries cooperating from other parts of the world. Not as an act of hostility against the United States in particular, or as a nation, or Europe, or whatever, or the people. No, not at all. But against this arrogant, violent approach being taken against them. And again, if you want to look at the case of Russia, ask yourself again, the United States, would they be happy? They had a crisis over the Cuba missiles, didn't they? That was resolved. Now imagine Russia, they're facing 20 Cuba crises next to their borders. What are they going to do? they're going to have to take measures to defend themselves. And the people who are in charge of Ukraine, they were not working for the benefit of the Ukrainian people. They were working for the benefit of their pockets and the pockets of their masters. If they cared for the Ukrainian people, well, you already had a deal with Trump in 2022. And guess what? There were already reports of them having a deal in July 2024. In July 2024, Orban, the PM of Hungary, he said that he mediated between Putin and between Zelensky, and there were good signs. The only differences were Zelensky was looking for a ceasefire, whereas Putin wanted peace. Putin wanted everything to be settled and over and done with. He did not want to continue with, things that they're not agreeing upon, or, Ukraine saying we want territories later on and this and that. Crimea is ours, according to him. By the way, regardless of how fair or unfair you think it is, by the way, it's not the thing here. We're talking about a complex situation. I mean, Ukraine is a 30-year-old country that was historically, and even with religion as well, Eastern Orthodoxy and what have you, traditionally tied with Russia, many of them Russian speaking too, cultures, habits, everything. But I think we're headed towards potentially a peaceful resolution. And a big part of that is the fact that the United States told them that, you're no longer going to get these indefinite numbers of arms. And this is how problematic the United States is. And this is how evil the United States administration is. Because if it wasn't for that, they could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives before. Likewise, if they did not support Israel with all of these millions and all of these bombs, they would have forced Israel to concede before too. Because Israel would know that I can no longer sustain this. Which says that the United States administration is the key problem, is the most problematic government / state in the whole world, and anyone allied with it. That's what history has shown. And thank you for that. Tori Mahmoud, did the USA get oil and gas contracts outside the Palestinian shores? And if so, Trump is telling him that Israel have very bad cards if things are blowing up. Well, there was no confirmation of who got these contracts. All we know is that around 10 multinational companies were offered to, were handed gas exploration, as in they haven't got the contract and the deal. But Netanyahu sent them out the details to come up with the proposals to have the gas exploration. Because you can't conclude anything unless you have a solution. You can't say, okay, that's it, you're going to start looking for the gas in all of the shores of Gaza with the war still going on. With the Palestinian resistance. You can't do that. And what Israel wants is to get rid of any Palestinian in power so that they can dictate whatever happens with that deal. And so that them and Trump can share things between them. Now, so long as you haven't eliminated Hamas, you will have a problem. Hamas, they will have capabilities to attack them. Guess what? Gas exploration fields off the shores of Asqalan or Ashkelon were in flames. And in Haifa as well, by the way, next to Haifa, during the attack from Iran. The Palestinian resistance, the Lebanese, Ansarullah, and many people have technology to go and attack gas exploration fields. Israel doesn't want that. When they had a deal with Lebanon, they knew very well that Hezbollah had the capacity to attack gas exploration fields. So, from their perspective, well, any contractor would need to be assured. They need to be reassured There needs to be safety measures. They're going to have staff, they're going to have crew, they're going to invest a lot of money. The last thing they want is something exploding. Therefore, they would ask for the hosting country or the inviting country to give them guarantees. Well, what political solutions did you have with the Palestinians that would reassure us, that would say that it's not going to be attacked? And can we have that in writing, please, from the movement? For example, if Israel wants guarantees from a Palestinian side, the Palestinian side would be telling them, well, what are we getting? This is our shore. You're an occupying entity. You see, so none of that can be concluded up until there's a solution. And the solution is not looking in the horizon at the moment. How long, Alan? How long can Neti stall the process when it's been agreed to? And will the Druze in Israel ever mobilize against Netanyahu who refuse to serve? I'll start with the second one. Yeah, I know for sure that there are more Druze inside of Israel, verified information, refusing to serve and being imprisoned. More. I'm not saying like quantities that would, change things dramatically, but there are more numbers. So long as Israel is still, in good relationship with the leaders who they had the agreements with, they will continue. However, you can't be conclusive, of course. Then, how long can Netanyahu stall the process when it's been agreed to? Well, he would stretch the borders as much as he wants. He would stretch things as much as he can and try and see if he can obtain certain things, any concessions or what have you. Really and truly, he knows very well that he cannot. And it's all a show from Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu is making himself look very, very ridiculous. He's trying to come up with this image of a strong leader, a victorious leader. He's making himself look like a fool because he's being untruthful to his own people and he's backing down afterwards. But to cover up him backing down, he'll just have another escalation to show that, nothing happened. So based on that, I think at one point he will concede and he'll go back to the negotiating table and he'll go back to phase 2. But again, you need to understand that he's stretching it. He's stretching it for a purpose. He doesn't want early elections. He wants certain things to be done in his reign, in the government. Control the judicial system, keep his allies with him so that he does not rely on a very weak safety net that would call for early elections as soon as the war is absolutely over and all of the Israeli prisoners of war are back. That would be very problematic for him. A lot of important Palestinian prisoners were exiled for prisoner exchange deal. Is this a significant concession to Israel? What's the plan to bring them back for a third and final intifada? Yes, and that only happened after they agreed to it. So the prisoners who Israel considered to be like red lines and we were never going to release them, who were released, well, some of them were exiled, some of them went to Gaza. Some of the serious ones went to Gaza and others went abroad. Now, they wouldn't have gone abroad unless they agreed to it because they were told when they were in prison, there is a prisoner exchange agreement. And by that agreement, and we have tried to exhaust all avenues to keep you, but this is what Israel is saying, they won't accept you in Palestine, any part of it, and you need to be exiled. Some of them said, fine, no problem. I'd rather be free in a third country rather than in these dungeons. Some of them refused. According to my knowledge, 7 refused and they decided to remain in prison. And what's the plan to bring them back? Well, I mean, one of them was very telling. Nail al-Barghouthi, the longest serving Palestinian prisoner. Nal Barouthi, he's in Egypt now. This guy went out and he made some statements, and he had this way of talking, this man. It's as if, you know, he's seeing like the end of Israel in front of his eyes. Firstly, you know, supporting the resistance, thanking them for releasing him, saying that the resistance is going to continue. And when he was asked about that same thing, he said that, I'm not going to be exiled forever because Israel is not going to last forever. And for those of you who don't know him, that's him. Nal Barouthi. So yeah, he said that I'm not going to be in exile forever because Israel is not going to last forever. And he was like supporting the Palestinians. So that's the mentality. That's the mentality of the Palestinian president. This man is an old man. He spent over 42 years, if I'm not mistaken, in prison. Okay, let's take maybe one or two questions. Okay, Marvin. Oh, and thank you for everyone who's sending supers. I'm sorry if I'm not seeing them in the live stream, in the live chat. There was Sheemti, Linda Lincoln, Marvin, Exfusions, and Exfusions again. Linda, you're saying, how can we help the people to come together? How can we help to understand their governments are controlling everything, even their detriment? Well, I think, to start with the second one, how can we help people understand their governments are controlling everything? I think we need to understand what the governments actually do control. Because if you actually believe that the governments are controlling everything, including you, then, and that's, I'm not addressing that to you, by the way, so don't take that like as me directing it to you, but in general, then you are, you have a slave mindset. I mean, people should believe that they are free, despite of anyone trying to imprison them or dictate what they do. Even if they live in a dystopia. So you should have the belief that you are a free individual who is at liberty to think what they want and say what they want without anyone terrorizing them. So that's number one. And if you have that, so if you overcome these barriers of fear that governments and their tools try and impose on you, then you've already taken the biggest step in the whole world, because, you know, you're free and, you know, you're at liberty to say what you want. You don't fear repercussions. Now, how can we have people come together? Well, it depends who you want to be close with, right? I mean, I don't want to come together with someone who supports a genocide, for example. I'm not interested in them. I don't want to come close to them. I'm interested in, if you talk about part of my work is, of course, you know, share what I believe is the truth based on genuine research and knowledge to counter the mainstream propaganda and lies and poison that they instill in people's brain, in many cases through psychological warfare and terrorism against their own population. That's part of my job. And anyone who shares, you know, the values that we speak about, you know, freedom of speech, justice, liberty, peace, respecting people, the people can come together based on shared values. However, if you don't have shared values with someone, why would you want to even come close to him? And some people are not even worth it. They're not even worth it to speak with, Linda. And thank you so much for that. Ex-fusions, will Israel build the third temple? They have plans to build the third temple. There are maps to build the third temple. There are organizations who get funding from the United States to build the third temple, and they have plans to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque, parts of that compound, and lift the third temple. Fortunately, there are many people who go and remain in Al-Aqsa and pray and constantly visit and monitor, but Al-Aqsa is a case that is very symbolic, and it symbolizes the neglect of primarily the Arab and Muslim leaders to Palestine, because that was the first qibla of the Muslims. Yet some people show that, you know, it's as if it's nothing. And he said, if they build it, will Palestine be destroyed? No. So long as there are Palestinians, no, why? And again, you're playing GTA. Enjoy GTA, my friend. No. So long as there are people, you know, you can't defeat them. And Wandering Owl, thank you so much for your super. Let's go back to the chat, see if we have. Okay. Bon Dewey, thank you. He said, do you think Hamas has more cards above the prisoners of war? I think the biggest card that not Hamas as a movement, by the way, but that Palestine and its people have, it's the people. They are the card. It's the people and their faith, their heroism, their bravery, their collective resistance and determination, regardless of anyone, of any movement or anything. But if we want to talk about Hamas as a movement in the current round, the prisoners of war are their biggest card. But we had previous cases where they didn't have these cards, and they emerged victorious, like in 2014. In 2014, it was a brutal war. 52 days, 1,400 martyrs, over 6,000 wounded, total destruction. And Israel invaded parts of Gaza. And guess what? They said at the time, we want to eliminate Hamas, like they said in 2008, we want to eliminate Hamas. And they ended up getting out, kicked out, with their tail between their legs. So Hamas has other points. But now the strongest one is the prisoners of war. And they are, oh my goodness, they are capitalizing on it, by the way, and using this card exceptionally well against Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's part of the reason that Benjamin Netanyahu is so furious and angry with them, by the way. Palatelli, do you think if the war completely resumes in Gaza, countries like Egypt would intervene militarily or support Hamas? I don't think any Arab country would go in and blatantly support Hamas. With regards to Egypt intervening militarily, the prospect of that happening has only escalated since the 7th of October. Because Egypt, they mobilized over 100,000 of their soldiers in Sinai. Egypt has tanks on the borders with Israel. Egypt had some of their biggest military drills from the beginning of the war. Egypt, by confirmation from Israelis who are concerned with this, especially in the Israeli military intelligence directorate, I think his name was Eli Dekel, who specializes in the infrastructure in Arab countries, has breached according to him, Egypt has breached every line of the Camp David Accords in Sinai with tunnel systems that fit trucks, with arms, with tanks, preparations, air defense systems, and personnel, both army and policing. However, Egypt will not fight on behalf of Gaza. Egypt won't fight to stop a genocide, because that didn't happen. But Egypt would fight if it is actually being attacked, or if they genuinely believe or have a confirmation, solid reason to believe that they will be attacked. And Egypt knows that its territory is wanted. And Egypt knows that when things get serious and there's a battle between them and Israel, that the United States will side with Israel, not with Egypt. Israel is already planning, and they're talking about plans. Israel never wanted to leave Sinai. They were forced to leave Sinai. And the Egyptian military is primarily training and arming and growing and getting more strength to fight Israel. All of their military practice is the northeastern front. There's only one hostile northeastern country to Egypt. It's called Israel, and Israel knows that very well. Okay. I'll take the last one from and Zakaria. Salam, brother. I love you too, and everyone else participating. Thank you. And sorry I can't reach all of the comments. Okay, I'll take these two. Okay, Stephen Kelly, why is Hezbollah quiet? Are they planning something? I think that Hezbollah, there are a couple of things. Firstly, they got a ceasefire. Israel withdrew from the majority parts of Lebanon. Hezbollah are facing a new reality, new geographical changes, geopolitical changes, a new government. There were intense internal talks between the Hezbollah community in Lebanon about the level of participation between Hezbollah and their attacks on Israel. During the past 15 months, there was a level of internal criticism from even the Hezbollah community towards Iran. That wasn't conclusive, of course, but there were, with the level of intensity, with the certain attacks that they were faced with, and with the level they went to. Despite all of that, Hezbollah are present in Lebanon. They are strong and they are capable. And their lifelines are still there. They are currently giving the state time to have certain things being resolved. During this time, they prepare themselves, they take a breather, they recover from the blows that they got. Don't forget, Hezbollah lost many of its founding fathers during the past 15 months. And that's for their actions against Israel, to go and support Gaza. These things need to be mentioned. But saying that, even with all of these attacks, they were still able to confront Israel and escalate their actions up until the last day. So far, they're giving the state time. They're giving the state time to see if they can expel Israel by diplomatic means. There are talks in Lebanon about having a new type of resistance that would counter any previous, issues, sanctions, labeling, judgments, right? And that's something that has been mentioned by multiple figures inside of Lebanon. But the key thing remains. Hezbollah have a reason to remain because they are still faced with an aggressor. Israel, with its arrogant moves, both in Lebanon and in Syria, gave more reasons for both the Lebanese and the Syrians to look at themselves and say, hold on a second, no, we don't just need resistance. We need a very strong resistance to protect us from this Zionist barbaric savagery next to us. So they're going to stay there. How long will they give that? The main question, I believe, with Hezbollah, by the way, is how much longer will they give the state to expel Israel? Are they going to give them a month, a year, or an indefinite time to sell them, look, make an effort and expel Israel? And is it going to work with the government or not? We'll see about that. We'll see about that. And absolutely, they will be planning. I mean, we'd be naive to think that they're not planning and that others are not planning too. Right? And learning lessons from the mistakes that happen. Okay. I'll take the last one from Marvin. You said that Jews have Yad Vashem. Do you see a Palestinian Holocaust museum? It would be a good lesson to the world, since never learned from World War II, and it would defang the Holocaust franchise. Well, I'd start with the Yad Vashem and the Holocaust franchise. And one thing that we need to understand is, by the way, many Jewish people do not agree with this concept of constant talking about this Holocaust and victimhood thing. Not all the Jews are like that. The Zionists, they were the ones who started the big marketing of this Holocaust and all of the suffering of World War II to justify the presence of an entity of terror founded on Zionism and committing worse crimes than what the Nazis did. So, and they're still using it now. And by the way, not many things were said. I mean, even I was listening to Norman Finkelstein a couple of weeks back, one of his podcasts, son of Holocaust survivors, Norman Finkelstein, a Jewish man, right? Highly critical of how much they use and abuse this whole Holocaust thing. He said that between 1944, 45 to 1967, there were hardly any books talking about the Holocaust. And that following the interest of the United States in the state of Israel and the expansion of the Zionist lobby inside of the United States, they started to talk about it more. And Israel being viewed as a strategic asset, Zionism trying to spread its propaganda, and what have you. Now, lessons learned. Who learned the lesson? The perpetrators haven't learned the lesson. They're committing a Holocaust against the Palestinian people under the name of their Holocaust. And how ironic, some people are sympathizing with a Holocaust that they haven't seen and denying a genocide happening in front of their eyes, being live streamed. What kind of sense is that? What kind of mentality is this? Now, moving forward, if you ask me personally, I don't think, past traumas are things to constantly talk about it too much and start, weeping and crying. Of course, genocide in Gaza, we've been talking about it for the past 16 months. It's important to talk about and highlight it and do whatever you can to expose everything and prevent it and stop it and make it not happen again. right? But I don't think that by lamenting over it, you will prevent another one from happening. You will prevent another one happening by taking concrete measures, concrete action. And guess what? If you want to talk about it from a state level, you need to have enough deterrence to make your enemies petrified from the idea of attacking you. They committed a genocide against the Palestinians because they were helpless, because they didn't have air defenses. They weren't fighting an army to army. The Zionists are cowards. They went up with their fighter jets on women and children, buried them under the rubble. Cowards. They're not men. They're cowards. Face to face, they ran like rats. And this is how they will eventually be defeated, by the way, running away from fear. So in future, if we want to prevent a genocide, you would need to have a level of intimidation to make your enemy not even entertain the thought in his head to attack you. And know very well that if he thinks of doing something, like they talk about leveling Gaza, right? Israel committed a genocide in Gaza because there was no deterrence to level Tel Aviv, for example, or level other parts of Israel. If anyone threatened Israel with leveling them, like they were leveling Gaza, they wouldn't have dared do anything. But there was no deterrence. The lesson to be learned is you need to have deterrence to prevent that. Now, that's not going to happen all the time, especially with nations under occupation, facing brutality for so long. But these are the lessons from the future, not crying and weeping. Crying and weeping won't bring any results. And we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Marvin, thank you for that. And everyone who was participating in the chat, and anyone who sent supers as well. The Virus, MCFC, thank you so much again, my friend Sheem. Linda, Marvin again, Xfusions playing his GTA, and Wandering Owl, and Trump is a Russian asset. That's not me, that's the name. Thank you all for your super. Thank you everyone else for participating. Of course, sorry if I didn't receive all of your or read out all of your comments, but much appreciated. Thank you so much. Apart from that, everyone, take care. Stay blessed, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone.